What if I told you that for 9 straight months, the most powerful nation on earth was completely blind? That while America's leaders were dealing with a global pandemic and a chaotic news cycle, foreign spies were walking freely through the digital hallways of its most sensitive government agencies. They were reading emails from the Treasury Department, exploring networks in the Pentagon, and mapping out the country's critical infrastructure. And the most terrifying part? Nobody had a clue. This wasn't the movie plot. It was real. And it wasn't a brute force attack that smashed down the front door. It was a silent, elegant, and utterly devastating infiltration that used our own trust against us. This is the story of the SolarWinds hack, the single greatest cyber espionage operation in American history, and how a tiny flaw in a piece of software became a skeleton key to the entire nation. To understand how this happened, you need to know about a company you've probably never heard of, SolarWinds. SolarWinds isn't a household name like Google or Apple, but in the world of IT, they're a giant. They create a software platform called Orion. Now, think of a massive office building with thousands of computers, servers, and printers. Orion is like the building's central nervous system. It's the management tool that IT administrators use to monitor everything, to make sure the network is healthy, to see if a server has crashed, or if the network is slowing down. Because it needs to see everything, Orion has the highest levels of access. It has the master keys to every single room in the building. Over 300,000 organizations around the world use SolarWinds products, including the majority of Fortune 500 companies and, critically, a huge number of U.S. federal agencies. The hackers, who U.S. intelligence would later identify as an elite Russian intelligence group known as Cozy Bear, knew this. They realized that trying to hack into the Pentagon or the Treasury Department directly would be incredibly difficult. It's like trying to scale the walls of a heavily guarded fortress. So, they came up with a much smarter plan. Why attack the fortress when you can bribe the people who built the delivery wagons going inside? This is called a supply chain attack. Imagine a bakery that supplies bread to the entire city. Instead of trying to poison every individual person, you just poison the flour at the bakery. Every loaf of bread that leaves the factory is now a weapon. In the digital world, the flour was SolarWinds' software update process. In late 2019, the hackers managed to breach SolarWinds' own network. They spent months studying how the company built and distributed its software, moving silently, learning everything. Then, in March of 2020, they made their move. They injected a few thousand lines of malicious code into a legitimate routine update for the Orion platform. When SolarWinds sent out this update, it was digitally signed and looked completely legitimate. So, like they had done countless times before, IT administrators all over the world clicked update. At least 18,000 organizations, including the Departments of Homeland Security, Commerce, State, and even parts of the Pentagon, willingly downloaded this poisoned update. They didn't just open the door for the hackers. They rolled out the red carpet and invited them inside. But here's where the genius of this hack becomes truly terrifying. The malicious code didn't activate right away. That would be too noisy, too easy to detect. Instead, it did nothing. For 2 full weeks, the code lay dormant, hiding inside the network like a sleeper agent. This dwell time was a brilliant move. It was designed to separate the installation event from any suspicious activity, making it almost impossible to trace the infection back to the SolarWinds update. After 2 weeks of silence, the malware, which cybersecurity experts would later name Sunburst, woke up. But it was still incredibly cautious. It disguised its communications to the hackers' command and control servers as legitimate Orion activity. To any security software watching, it just looked like the Orion platform doing its normal job. Now think about this. 18,000 organizations had this Trojan horse inside their networks. But the hackers weren't interested in all of them. This wasn't a smash and grab for credit card numbers. This was a precision espionage campaign. The Sunburst malware would send a quiet signal back to its masters, identifying the victim's network. The hackers would then decide if the target was valuable. Was it a major corporation? Was it a sensitive government agency? If the answer was yes, they would use the Sunburst backdoor to deliver a second, more powerful payload of malware. This second stage gave them deep, persistent access. They could create their own accounts, steal credentials, move freely through the network, and most importantly, read, copy. They were a phantom presence inside the networks of the Department of Energy, which oversees America's nuclear weapons stockpile. They were inside the National Institutes of Health during a global pandemic. They were inside the Treasury and Commerce departments, potentially accessing sensitive economic and policy data. For 9 months, from March to December of 2020, they operated completely undetected. The most sophisticated cybersecurity defenses in the world, costing taxpayers billions of dollars, saw absolutely nothing. So if the NSA, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security's own cyber defense agencies couldn't see this happening, who finally caught the ghosts? The answer is almost unbelievable. The alarm was finally raised, not by the government, but by a private cybersecurity company named FireEye. And they only found it because they themselves were a target. In December 2020, FireEye, one of the most respected cybersecurity firms on the planet, detected a breach of its own network. The hackers had managed to steal FireEye's Red Team tools. These are the tools that FireEye's own ethical hackers use to simulate attacks on their clients to test their defenses. In the wrong hands, these tools could be devastating. As FireEye's experts began a forensic investigation to figure out how they got hacked, they noticed something bizarre. One of their employees had a security alert pop up, saying that someone had tried to log in to their account from an unfamiliar device. The employee was confused. They had their company phone right there, but the system showed a second device registered to their name, a ghost device that the employee had never seen. This single tiny anomaly was the thread. As FireEye's investigators pulled on it, the entire conspiracy began to unravel. They traced the ghost login back and back, through layers of deception, until they found the source. The malicious code hidden deep inside the SolarWinds Orion update. Think about the irony of that for a second. The government's top intelligence agencies were in the dark. The only reason this historic breach was ever discovered is because the hackers got a little greedy. They went after a cybersecurity company, and that company was good enough to catch them. On December 8th, 2020, FireEye went public with their findings. A few days later, SolarWinds disclosed to its 18,000 affected customers that their networks were compromised. The quietest invasion in history was suddenly front-page news, and panic began to set in across Washington. Once the alarm was sounded, the true scale of the damage started to become clear, and it was worse than anyone imagined. This wasn't like previous mega hacks. The Yahoo breach, for example, compromised 3 billion accounts. That's a staggering number, but it was mostly names and email addresses. The 2015 Office of Personnel Management hack was more serious. It exposed the personal data of over 22 million federal employees, including fingerprints and intimate details from security clearance applications. That was a gold mine for blackmail. But the SolarWinds hack was different. This wasn't about stealing data to sell on the dark web or to blackmail individuals. This was about strategic, long-term intelligence gathering. This was about embedding spies deep inside an adversary's most critical systems. The goal wasn't just to steal what's there now, but to gain a permanent foothold. What did they get? The full extent is still classified, and we may never know the complete truth. But we know they accessed the unclassified email systems of the Treasury and Commerce departments. This means they could have been reading the emails of top officials, learning about U.S. economic policy, sanctions, and trade negotiations in real time. They could have seen sensitive documents, strategic plans, and details about vulnerabilities in America's critical infrastructure. This was the digital equivalent of having a spy sitting in on a cabinet meeting. U.S. intelligence agencies, including the FBI and NSA, were unanimous in their assessments. They attributed the attack to the group known as APT-29, or Cozy Bear. This isn't a gang of criminals in a basement. Cozy Bear is widely believed to be a unit of Russia's SVR, their Foreign Intelligence Service, the modern-day equivalent of the KGB. For its part, the Russian government has flatly denied any involvement, calling the accusations baseless. But the evidence, according to the US government, is overwhelming. The discovery of the hack triggered a firestorm of controversy. How could this happen? How could the US government, which spends over $18 billion a year on cybersecurity, be so completely defenseless? Investigations revealed embarrassing failures. Some federal agencies were slow to patch their systems. Others had insufficient encryption. The breach exposed a fundamental weakness, not just in technology, but in policy and preparedness. But the bigger, more terrifying question raised by SolarWinds was about the very nature of our digital world. Think about all the software you use every day. Your phone's operating system, the apps you download, the programs on your work computer. You trust that it's safe. You trust the company that made it. And you trust the updates they send you. The SolarWinds attack shattered that trust. It proved that any single link in that long, complex software supply chain could be poisoned. A vulnerability in one company can become a vulnerability for everyone who uses their product. We are all connected. In the wake of the attack, the US government went into overdrive. President Biden signed an executive order aimed at strengthening federal cybersecurity standards. New legislation was passed to improve security in the software supply chain and to mandate that companies report breaches more quickly. There was a massive, multi-billion-dollar effort to hunt down any remaining traces of the hackers in government networks and to fortify defense. But is it enough? The threat hasn't gone away. The digital Cold War is only heating up. In fact, in early 2024, it was revealed that hackers linked to the Chinese government had breached a different third-party vendor used by the US Treasury, showing that these supply chain vulnerabilities are still being actively exploited. The SolarWinds playbook is now out there for other nations. In the end, the SolarWinds hack was more than just the biggest hack in American history. It was a paradigm shift. It was a wake-up call that exposed the soft underbelly of our hyper-connected, software-driven world. We built a global economy and our entire government infrastructure on a foundation of digital trust. And the SolarWinds hackers showed us just how easy it is to dynamite that foundation. So, how did a single piece of software become a skeleton key to a superpower? By exploiting the one vulnerability that can be patched with code: trust. The trust we place in the companies that write our software, the updates we download without a second thought, and the systems we believe. The SolarWinds attack was a silent, 9-month-long digital heart attack for the United States. The question now is, did we learn the right lessons? Or did we just hit the snooze button on an even bigger catastrophe waiting to happen? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you want to understand more about the hidden digital battles that are shaping the future of our world, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we are just scratching the surface.